Truistery Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
Truistery Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. Elysant Moonspire's heart pounded like a war drum as she stepped from the rattling carriage onto the uneven cobblestones of Stormquill Citadel's outer courtyard. At 26, she had braced herself for duty and sacrifice when she accepted Draven Stormquill's alliance. But nothing in her quiet years among the lilac orchards of Moonspire Village had prepared her for the austere grandeur and chilling indifference of this ancient fortress. The air tasted of salt spray and damp stone. Torches flickered against onyx walls, casting elongated shadows that writhed like restless spirits. High above, the citadel's towers pierced a sky bruised with the purple dusk, their falcon-etched battlements surveying every arrival as though nothing could pass unseen.
tonight,
In exchange for her family's dowry, Elysant would become Draven's bride, an instant heiress to a legacy as unfeeling and imposing as the granite ramparts that loomed overhead. She paused to adjust the silver lilies braided into her braid, her cream-tasseled gown whispering against the ground. In her palms rested a single bouquet of violet blooms tied with indigo ribbon, Stormquill's colors. It felt incongruous in her hands, as though she clutched a living symbol of the cold transaction she'd entered. Every breath brought the faint clang of hammer on anvil from the lower workshops, where masons and carpenters labored to restore the citadel's aging walls. They would shape stone for centuries to come. Yet here tonight the fate of a young woman would hinge on the generosity of that very fortune. She followed the chamberlain through a pair of iron-bound doors into a vaulted entry hall hung with tapestries depicting Stormquill triumphs. Ships cleaving dark waves under blood-red skies. Banners snapping in wind, falcons swooping upon enemy sails. Each scene glorified conquest and unwavering discipline. Elysant's pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out the distant echo of approaching footsteps. When she stepped into the vaulted grand hall, the torch's glow revealed Vespera Coldthorn seated upon a dais of black marble. Clad in violet brocade and sable mantle, Vespera's presence was regal and menacing. Her steely gaze fixed upon the newcomer as though piercing the fragile ribbon of tissue between obligation and desire. Lady Moonspire, Vespera intoned, voice low, measured, as though carved from the same living stone as the citadel itself. You stand at the heart of Stormquill Citadel. Welcome. She rose with deliberate poise, each movement silent as falling snow. Elysant curtsied deeply, her cheeks aflame beneath the torchlight. "Thank you, grandmother," she whispered, her voice quavering despite all her resolve. Vespera's lips tightened in a half-smile, more a contraction of steel than warmth, before she stepped aside. Courtiers in midnight blue and silver cloaks formed a silent arc, their eyes curious and speculative, appraising the bride who arrived on the promise of gold. A moment later Draven Stormquill appeared, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair closely cropped, storm-gray eyes scanning the hall with indifferent command. He bowed, voice cool and distant. "Elysant," he said, "I trust your journey was without trouble." His words were cordial, but his expression revealed no spark of intimacy, only the solemn duty of a lord preserving his lineage. She offered a small, polite smile. "Yes, my lord." The road was clear, and the carriage comfortable. He inclined his head and motioned toward the long oak tables laden with silver platters and crystal goblets. "Join us, Lady Moonspire." Then, as silently as a drifting wisp of fog, he was swept away by his advisors, leaving her to navigate this new world alone. Music swelled, harps and lutes weaving a gentle tapestry of sound that couldn't quite mask the undercurrent of tension. Guests approached with perfunctory bows, murmuring compliments on her gown, hand-woven silk the color of moonlight, while their eyes flickered with pity or intrigue. She offered, "Thank you, and you honor me," yet every syllable felt forced. her throat constricting with the knowledge that she had arrived as much for the glow of her dowry as for any wish of her own. Draven's absence at her side during the reception underscored her outsider status. Even when she caught his gaze across the hall, it flickered away, more duty-bound than affectionate. When the reception waned, a silent steward ushered Elysant down a corridor lit by wrought iron sconces. The walls here were lined with tapestries of storms and sea dragons, each thread a reminder that the Stormquills had weathered tempests both literal and political. She was shown to her chambers, 2 interconnected rooms warmed by roaring hearths, furnished with ebony tables carved in falcon motifs and heavy velvet draperies. Vespera appeared once more, laying down the first decree of Elysant's new life. At dawn, you will preside over the morning repast. Draven expects his tea at precisely 8 minutes before sunrise. Fail him, and you fail Stormquill. Do you understand? Elysant bowed again, lips pressed tight. Yes, grandmother. But she knew that obedience would cost her more than pride, perhaps even the spark of hope she carried. Alone at last, Elysant placed her bouquet beside an ornate mirror and sank onto the edge of the bed. She drew the silver locket at her throat, a gift from her mother, and opened it to reveal a faded portrait of her younger self, laughing shoulder to shoulder with her brother under the blossom-scented boughs of their family's orchard. She pressed it to her heart, fighting tears. Outside, wind rattled the window panes, and somewhere deep in the citadel, a clock told the hour. Each chime felt like a measured knock at the citadel gates, marking the passage of the life she once knew. She lay back, eyes tracing the shadowed rafters overhead, breathing in the scent of burning wood and aged stone. In her veins coursed fear, yes, but also determination. If Stormquill Citadel was unyielding, so was she. Tomorrow would bring tasks and demands stranger and harsher than any she had faced. Yet Elysant Moonspire would endure. Within her flickered a quiet flame, the promise that she would learn every corridor's secret, every protocol's rhythm, until she could stand as more than a dowry or a dutiful title. To protect her son Zepharos Dawn's hard, to honor her own spirit, she would find strength in the Citadel's very stones. A final torch's glow faded in the corridor beyond. She closed her eyes as tears finally slipped free, whispering into the hushed chamber, I am here, and I will not be lost. Outside the walls, storms might rage across Starfell expanse. And within these halls, hearts might beat in cold calculation, but beneath the surface of her trembling resolve, Elysant kindled a rebellion of hope. In that fragile ember lay the seed of her destiny, waiting to blaze free of gilded cages and ancestral chains. And so, beneath the ancient turreted roofs, the first chapter of Elysant Moonspire's life at Stormquill Citadel came to its close. Dawn would demand her service, torches would illuminate secrets, and the Citadel's echoing corridors would test her mettle. But in the darkness of that first night, she vowed she would survive, and in time, carve her own path from the cold stone and shadow. Elysant Moonspire awoke before dawn to a cold draft slipping beneath the heavy velvet drapes. The Citadel's great halls had been silent for hours, yet now the clatter of shutters and the distant scraping of a broom announced the arrival of another day's trials. She swung her legs over the edge of the four-poster bed and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. In mere moments, she would exchange the soft silk gowns of a bride for the coarse linen apron of a servant, a transformation that stung more sharply each time she braced herself for it. Pulling on her simple gray shift and lacing up ankle boots, Elysant paused at the threshold of the corridor. The torchlight painted the stone walls in flickering gold, guiding her down the narrow passage toward the kitchens. Already, she could hear the clink of copper pots, the low murmur of scullery maids, and the scolding voice of the head cook. In Moonspire Village, her mornings had begun with laughter and warm hearths. Here, they began with hushes, demands, and the fear of missteps. A cold wind rattled the kitchen's large windows. Elysant took a steadying breath and stepped inside. Dozens of servants in drab uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, a maid kneading dough, an apprentice stoking coals. Another polishing the great iron cauldron where porridge would soon bubble. The head cook, Mistress Hawk, turned as Elysant entered, her lined face paling in alarm. "Lady Elysant," she said, voice tight, "you should not be here." Elysant forced a courteous nod. "Mistress Hawk, grandmother instructed me to oversee the morning repast." Mistress Hawk's eyes flicked to the narrow stone staircase, where Vespera Coldthorn might descend at any moment for her first meal of the day. "Very well," the cook muttered, stepping aside. "Help the others tidy the tables. The pewter platters must gleam by the time the household arrives." Elysant knelt by the long oaken table and began to polish the rough-hewn surface with a stiff brush. Each stroke strained her back, yet she forced herself to match the scullery maid's swift rhythm. A handful of courtiers wandered in, eyeing her with thinly veiled disdain. Lady Amara Trent murmured to her companion, "See how the new bride sweats for our pleasure." Elysant gritted her teeth and kept her gaze fixed on the grain of the wood, the scrape of brush against polished oak drowning out the cutting whispers. Minutes later, a voice called, "Zepharos." The little boy burst in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His curly hair was tousled, and his cheeks were pink in the chill. Elysant rushed to scoop him into her arms, murmuring, "Good morning, darling. Did you sleep well?" Zepharos nodded, wide-eyed, before noticing the scrubbed tabletops and steaming porridge kettle. "Is this my breakfast, Mama?" Elysant smiled through her fatigue. "Yes, my love. Once grandmother arrives, I'll bring you a bowl." She set him gently on his feet and handed him a neat bundle of cloth. Inside his clothes were fresh, folded just so. He embraced her skirt and gripped her hand with tiny fingers, each reassuring squeeze reminding her why she endured this. A sharp knock echoed through the kitchen, and Mistress Hawk froze. "Lady Elysant," she said, voice clipped. "Grandmother requests your presence immediately." Heart pounding, Elysant lifted Zepharos and ascended the narrow staircase, each step echoing in the corridor. Outside the grand hall, Vespera Coldthorn stood beside a long table set with fine china and silver teawares, her expression calm but imperious. Draven Stormquill stood just behind her, cross-armed, his gray gaze measuring. Courtiers lined the walls in stiff formality, their whispers like scuttling spiders. Elysant placed Zepharos down and curtsied, bowing so deeply that her shift brushed the flagstones. "Good morning, grandmother," she intoned. Vespera's lips curved in a faint, unwelcome smile. "You are on time, which is more than I expected." She nodded at the table. "Pour the tea." Hands trembling, Elysant lifted the silver kettle and poured steaming amber liquid into each delicate cup, mindful of the precise 8-minute ritual. She filled Draven's cup last. He held out a pale hand, and with practiced politeness, she handed it to him. At his nod, the courtiers moved forward to serve themselves. While they drank, Vespera raised her voice, so all could hear. "Lady Elysant, I trust you understand your position. Here, you will serve, obey, and never question the needs of this house. Your son's well-being, and my grandson's inheritance, depend on your compliance." Elysant's cheeks heated, but she spoke softly. "Yes, grandmother. I will do my best." Draven sipped his tea, his gaze fixed on a distant turret, as though far more comfortable inspecting stonework than watching his new wife. Zepharos clung to Elysant's skirt, peering at the silver spoons and chipped porcelain. Elysant crouched to whisper, "Soon, darling. Soon I'll bring you your breakfast." As the adults retired for strategic discussions of expenses and repairs, Elysant scooped Zepharos into her arms and ushered him out of the hall. A footman handed her a copper bowl of thick oatmeal flavored with honey and dried figs. Zepharos dug in, his small face lighting with delight. Elysant set down the ladle and watched him eat, tasting a fleeting warmth as joy spread across his features. Yet beyond the sunlit courtyard, the stone walls seemed to close in, shadows creeping along the ramparts as though to remind her that this sanctuary for her son was as barren as her own promise of happiness. Midday chores offered no respite. She spent hours in the West Wing scullery, hands immersed in dishwater so hot she feared her skin would blister. She sorted linens in the East Wing's laundry room, the damp cloths stiff with scratchy starch. At each turn, a lady-in-waiting's indignant stare or a courtier's snide remark trailed behind her like a phantom. The loudest barb came from Lady Cordelia Payne, who sneered, "If you can manage a washtub, perhaps you could also manage a dowry." Elysant bit back tears, replying only, "I serve my son's future." Inwardly, she vowed that her dignity would not crumble under insult. By late afternoon, her back cramped from stooping over piles of soiled linen. She carried a basket to the drying yard, a walled courtyard behind the kitchens, where the wind tousled clothes on lines strung between stone pillars. A few servants took pity, offering silent nods or hurried broom passes so she could rest, but none dared speak openly. Elysant draped the linens and paused to catch her breath, hand pressed against a stone pillar as cool as ice. She inhaled, tasting the faint tang of laundry soap and moss, and forced her legs to remain steady. For Zepharos, she would endure every indignity. At dusk, the Citadel's schedule shifted, from chores to lessons, from ironing to mending. Mistress Hawk handed Elysant a stack of napkins and linen cuffs stained with gravy. "Press these by candlelight. Grandmother demands perfection." The head cook's eyes were gentle, perhaps aware Elysant's hands bore more weight than fabric, but her words left no room for protest. Elysant retrieved the heavy irons from the hearth's coals and began pressing, each swipe of molten metal leaving a little fossilized seam in the fine cloth. As the lamps dimmed and the Citadel's corridors grew echoingly silent, Elysant held the last pressed cloth against her chest and listened. Her son's laughter beside her hearth in Moonspire village was a distant memory, replaced here by the hush of ghosts and the relentless ticking of destiny's clock. She glanced at her reflection in a dusty mirror, ashen hair pulled back too tightly, cheeks hollow from exhaustion, eyes rimmed with fatigue. Yet behind them flickered a fierce resolve. She would endure. She would master the Citadel's rhythms. She would carve out a place for Zepharos' dawn's hard where laughter, not fear, could blossom. By candle's glow, Elysant folded the last napkin and stored it in a polished linen chest. She tucked a scrap of lavender herb into her shift pocket, a small talisman, breathed in its calming fragrance, and whispered a vow. "Through scorn and shadow, I will rise." Outside her small chamber window, the turrets of Stormquill Citadel pierced the ink-black sky, and the wind carried the promise of distant storms. Yet within her, a greater storm brewed, the quiet fury of a mother's love and a woman's unbreakable will. And so, as the candle guttered low, Elysant Moonspire, bride, servant, mother, prepared to face another day in the household's unending crucible, her spirit neither bent nor broken by the Citadel's harsh demands. By the first pale rays of dawn, Elysant Moonspire had already abandoned any hope of restful slumber. Her hands, roughened by scullery soaps and dishwater, ached for something softer, something that did not carry the sting of salt and ash. In the narrow upper chamber that served as Zepharos' bedroom, she paused at a small wooden table beneath a single, flickering lantern. There lay her precious tools, a well-worn thimble molded to her fingertip, gleaming pins of burnished steel, and spools of thread in colors richer than the Citadel's stony palette, midnight indigo, moonlit silver, and deep violet to mirror the Stormquill crest. Each item was a lifeline, a reminder that beyond the Citadel's oppressive routines she still possessed a talent that could forge a brighter future. With Zepharos bundled in a spare shift and settled against a stack of embroidered pillows, she gathered her materials and made her way down the back stairs, damp stone steps worn smooth by centuries of footfalls. The corridors were deserted at this hour, save for the distant drip of leaking gutters and the hoot of an unseen owl. Elysant's breath puffed in small clouds as she descended, and her boots echoed like muted drums against the cold stone. She reached the service entrance to the great hall of tailoring, a modest room tucked near the kitchens, its windows facing east so that noonday sun might flood the workspace. A single lantern glowed there, suspended from a wrought iron hook, illuminating a sturdy oak table scarred by decades of cuts and pinholes. Above it, shelves lined with neat fabric bolts displayed a riot of color against the stern gray walls. Bolts of cream brocade shot through with silver threads. Rolls of velvet that caught the light like starlit pools. Lengths of soft linen in muted ivory and dove gray. Under one window stood a vintage Singer sewing machine, its iron wheel oiled and gleaming, the brass nameplate worn smooth by careful hands. Elysant set Zepharos down and draped her shawl over the back of a chair. "Stay right here, sweetheart," she whispered. He nodded solemnly, clutching a small wooden toy, an eagle carved with fine detail. He was used to this ritual. Mornings where his mother's devotion took shape in measured stitches rather than hushed ceremonies of the Citadel. Elysant picked up a length of fabric destined for Lady Vespera's embroidered gown and draped it across the table. She smoothed it with care, aligning the ornate pattern of interlacing falcons so it would flow seamlessly from bodice to hem. With practiced fingers, she threaded her needle and began to baste a seam. Each stitch was a small triumph, thread looping through cloth, binding two pieces into a stronger whole. The act of creation filled her with quiet joy, a stark contrast to the Citadel's demands that she break her back for porridge and linen starch. Here, she was artisan and visionary, her talent valued for its beauty and precision rather than her capacity for servitude. The door creaked open, and a shaft of morning light slanted across the room as Mistress Hawk, the head cook, stepped in. Her usual scowl melted into something softer when she saw Elysant at work. "You're up early," she observed, voice hushed as though sharing a secret. Elysant smiled, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "I find peace in these stitches. They remind me I still have purpose, beyond the Citadel's endless chores." Mistress Hawk nodded, her lined face creasing with empathy. "I'll fetch you fresh tea. You'll need strength for the day." She left with a quiet footstep, and Elysant resumed her work. The rhythmic rise and fall of needle through fabric a meditative counterpoint to the storm of her circumstances. By mid-morning, sunbeams crept through the leaded glass panes, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the room. Zepharos pressed his face to the glass, watching the shifting lights as he hummed a tender tune. Noticing a stray pin on the floor, he picked it up and set it gently on the table, a small attempt to help. Elysant touched his hair and whispered, "Thank you, love. You're my brave little tailor." She drew him onto her lap, so he could watch the machine's wheel turn, its rhythmic chug and the soft clack of metal parts a lullaby for the soul. Soon a light rap sounded on the door. A page boy's voice called, "Lady Elysant, Master Draven requests your attendance. Your tailor's report for Lady Vespera is due." Her heart caught. Already the Citadel's expectations encroached upon her sanctuary. She placed Zepharos gently on the floor and rose, straightening her shift. "I'll be there in a moment," she called, and tucked the needle and thread into her apron pocket. At the Citadel's central corridor, tapestries muted by age hung like silent sentinels. Elysant's footsteps resonated in the hush. She reached the antechamber outside Lady Vespera's solar and paused to smooth her hair, though she knew Vespera would find fault in any stray curl. The heavy oak door swung open before she could knock. Vespera sat behind an imposing desk of polished ebony, her lean fingers drumming a slow rhythm. Beside her, Draven consulted a ledger, quill poised. Neither spared her a welcoming glance. They watched as Elysant entered carrying a neat bundle of fabric swatches and sketches, her proposed alterations to the widow Blackthorn's mourning wardrobe. Elysant bowed. "Grandmother, my report for Lady Vespera's gowns." She laid out the swatches in a precise sequence, silk panels in storm gray edged with silver filigree, velvet trims in deep indigo, lining in pale lavender to soften the austerity of morning black. Vespera's cool gaze swept across the samples. She fingered the filigree with a gloved hand. "Your craftsmanship is admirable, but the embroidery must be denser, more pronounced against the silk. I will need it completed before the fortnight's end, or House Stormquill will delay reparations." Do you understand? Elysant suppressed a wince at the pressure, but met Vespera's eyes steadily. Yes, grandmother. I will refine the embroidery and adjust the density. She inclined her head. It shall be ready by the deadline. Draven's storm-gray eyes flickered to hers. Make no mistake, Elysant, he said quietly. The Citadel's reputation rests on our presentation. You may not fail. His words lacked malice, but carried unspoken weight. She nodded. I will not fail. They dismissed her with a slight flick of Vespera's hand. Elysant gathered the swatches and sketches, careful not to crease the paper, and withdrew. In the stairwell, her pulse pounded, not solely from fear, but from resolve. The Citadel demanded excellence in every seam and fold. She would deliver it. Here, in the heart of oppression, her craft would be both her armor and her sword. Returning to the tailoring room, she found Zepharos building a tower of pincushions. He looked up, eyes bright. Mama, is it done? He whispered. Kneeling, Elysant hugged him. We have work to do, my brave artisan, but together we will see it through. She brushed a lock of hair from his forehead and set him to gather threads of silver. He scampered off with childlike enthusiasm, unconcerned by the Citadel's stony walls. Elysant settled at the sewing machine and threaded the shuttle with careful hands. The machine came alive with a smooth hum, the electric promise of creation. Her foot found the pedal, and the wheel turned. Fabric slipped beneath the needle, and each precise stitch sang with resilience. She worked late into the afternoon, sketching new embroidery patterns on scraps of parchment, consulting borrowed volumes on needlework, and inventing innovative motifs that danced at the edges of tradition. The scent of lavender-scented soap from the courtyard laundry wafted through the open window, mingling with the earthy perfume of damp stone. Elysant paused to breathe it in, feeling reinvigorated. Outside, the Citadel's calls to duty, loud steps, distant voices, paled beside the quiet miracle of cloth and thread. Here, she had carved out a realm of her own mastery. As dusk approached, torches were lit in the hall, and the tailoring room grew shadowy. Elysant packed her tools into a worn leather satchel, thimble, needles, scraps of embroidery thread, and the parchment sketches. She cleaned the machine with oiled cloth, ensuring it would be ready at dawn. Zepharos curled against her side, yawning, clutching his wooden eagle toy. Time for supper, my love, she murmured, scooping him up. In the flicker of torchlight, she glanced at the rows of fabric bolts. Each held the memory of her mother's laughter in Moonspire village, the whisper of wind through orchard blossoms, the soft murmur of bees. Those memories fueled her soul as she carried her son down the stone stairwell. That evening, as she delivered the satchel to Mistress Hawk for safekeeping, the head cook gave her a knowing nod. Your talent is your inheritance, lady. The Citadel may demand your sweat, but your gift is your true legacy. Elysant pressed her gloved hand to her heart. I will honor it, she replied softly. In that promise lay the promise of something greater than mere survival. The chance to weave a new destiny, one stitch at a time, beneath Stormquill Citadel's unending shadows. And with each stitch, she reclaimed a measure of freedom for herself and a brighter future for Zepharos Dawn's heart. Night had already fallen when Elysant Moonspire returned to her chambers, the torchlit corridors of Stormquill Citadel now hushed and brooding. Her skirts were damp from the sea mist drifting in through open windows, and her hands still bore the faint stain of indigo thread from the day's tailoring. In Moonspire village, the evening brought laughter and warm hearths. Here, it brought only solitude and the distant echo of stone settling in the cold air. She eased the door shut behind her, careful not to let the hinges creak, and found Zepharos Dawn's hard sleeping soundly in his small wooden crib. His chest rose and fell with gentle innocence, unaware of the storm gathering overhead. Elysant bent to brush a loose curl from his forehead, her heart twisting with both love and dread. She whispered his name as if summoning the courage to face the night's trials. Wrapping him in a soft woolen blanket, she carried him to the adjacent chamber, her own modest quarters, where a simple cot and a lone lantern awaited. She tucked him in, smoothing blankets around him, and kissed his brow. His golden lashes fluttered once before he slipped back into peaceful sleep. Silence reigned until a sudden harsh rap on the door shattered the stillness. Elysant's breath caught. It was late, too late for routine visits. She set Zepharos' hand on his pillow and crossed the room swiftly, throat tight. "Yes," she called, voice low. The door opened abruptly, and Draven Stormquill strode in, his dark coat glinting with faint reflections of torchlight. His gray eyes were shadowed by frustration, and the faint trace of alcohol scent clung to his breath. He closed the door behind him with a grim slam. Elysant's pulse raced. She had seen her husband enraged before, but never in the dim hours when the Citadel's guardians slept. "Where's my dowry coin?" Draven demanded, stepping toward her. His voice was a whip crack in the confined space. "The one you promised for repairs today." He thrust out his hand, palm upward. Elysant's heart sank. "I gave it to grandmother, as she instructed," she answered softly. She glanced toward Zepharos' crib, but he lay still, unruffled. "She said I must hand it to her directly." Draven's boot heel struck the floor dangerously close. "Don't lie to me," he snarled. "Your word carries weight only when I choose to trust it." He advanced, looming over her, and she shrank back, the scrap of cloth in her hand crumpling like fragile hope. "Please," she murmured, voice trembling, "I swear." He raised his hand. Lightning flickered in his eyes. With a swift motion, he struck her across the cheek. The slap echoed like thunder, and a hot sting bloomed where his palm landed. Elysant gasped, stumbling backward into the bedpost. Her fingertips grazed the smooth wood as she pressed her palm to her throbbing cheek. Tears sprang despite her effort to hold them at bay. Draven's chest heaved with anger. "You threaten the Citadel with your carelessness," he spat. "I will not have dwarves and stable hands whispering that their lord's bride is incompetent." He glared at her with icy contempt. "Fix it. Now. Or I will see you regretting every stitch you've sewn." Elysant swallowed the lump in her throat. The room seemed to tilt. Every memory of her mother's gentle counsel and Zepharos' bright laughter rushed forward, colliding with the brutal reality of this life. Her hands shook as she touched her cheek, a red blossom swelling beneath her fingertips. She closed her eyes, determined not to let him see her fear. I understand," she whispered. Draven snorted and turned away. "Good." He strode toward the door, but paused, glancing back. "I will return at dawn. I expect the funds." With that, he was gone, leaving her in a hollow silence that pressed in on her like a vice. Elysant sank onto the edge of her cot, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it would burst. She turned toward her sleeping son, the faint glow from the lantern casting silver highlights across his golden hair. Zepharos lay curled against the pillow, innocent and trusting. Guilt coiled around her. If she failed to deliver the coin, Draven would find a harsher way to punish her. Yet if she betrayed Vespera Coldthorn's explicit instructions, hand the dowry to the matriarch, she risked the Citadel's ire in a different form. Caught between ancestors' decrees and her husband's wrath, she felt the very stones of the fortress pressed down on her spirit. Tears slipped free, and Elysant pressed her fingers to her eyes. He had struck her for obedience, for perfection, for her very presence in Stormquill Citadel. Yet in that moment, witnessing Zepharos' peaceful slumber, she realized she could no longer endure this life of fear and servitude. The Citadel's walls were thick, and its towers soared, but they could not hold her heart captive forever. If she did not act soon, the ropes binding her resolve might fray beyond repair. She rose, gingerly touching her cheek, and extinguished the lantern. Midnight shadows fell. Yet within her mind a spark grew. She thought of the secret elbow room beneath the tailoring workshop, the hidden passage Mistress Hawk had once hinted at, an old servant's tunnel leading beyond the Citadel gates. She whispered Zepharos' name, her voice resolute. "My love," she murmured. "We will leave this place. We will find freedom together." Silhouetted in the gloom, Elysant retrieved her leather satchel from beneath the cot. Inside lay gold coins saved from her tailoring earnings, precious bolts of silk and velvet that she could trade for safe passage, and the silver locket from her mother. She repacked the satchel with care, wrapping each item in scraps of cloth. Her hands no longer trembled. They moved with purpose born of desperation. She touched Zepharos's cheek, whispering, "Sleep well, darling. Soon we will share new dreams, ones not bound by stone and cruel words." The pain in her cheek throbbed, but it fueled her determination. Stormquill Citadel had demanded her dowry, her obedience, even her dignity. Now, at the edge of night, it had demanded her body and her spirit. She would take back what was hers. Minutes later, she slipped out of the chamber under a cloak of quiet moonlight, Zepharos tucked against her shoulder, his head sleepy and warm. She crept down the winding servant stairs, a battered lantern hanging at her side to guide the way. Each footfall in the deserted corridors felt like a heartbeat echoing loud in her ears. At the base of the stairway, Mistress Hawke's kindly voice emerged from the darkness. "Lady Elysant?" Elysant froze. "Mistress Hawke," she replied softly, bracing for harsh reprisal. But instead the cook emerged, holding a small bundle of clean shifts. "I thought you might need these," she said quietly. "And another thing." She handed Elysant a tarnished key on a leather strap. "This opens the old tunnel beneath the tailoring workshop. I've been too afraid to use it. But tonight," she hesitated. "Carry on, child. I'll watch for a moment." Elysant's chest swelled with gratitude. She embraced the older woman, tears escaping. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll repay you." Mistress Hawke smiled, her lined face gentle. "You'll live a life worth the risk. That's thanks enough." Then she slipped back into the shadows, leaving Elysant and her sleeping son alone by a hidden stone door engraved with faded runes. "Hand steady now." Elysant inserted the key and turned. The door clicked open to reveal a narrow tunnel sloping downward, damp stone walls lit by a single lantern at its mouth. Beyond lay freedom. With a final glance back at the Citadel's looming fortifications, Elysant drew a breath and stepped inside, her son stirring at the movement. As the door closed behind them, muffling the world of tyranny and fear, Elysant pressed Zepharos close. "In the darkness," she whispered, "hold tight, my love. Our path lies beyond these stones." And in that fragile moment, heart pounding with equal parts terror and hope, she tasted the first breath of her new life. One she would forge with every ounce of courage and every stitch of her indomitable spirit. The dawn sky over Astral Haven was streaked with lavender and rose as Elysant Moonspire guided the small cart down winding cobblestone streets for the very first time. Zepharos Dawn's Hard nestled sleepily in his arms, his cully hair damp with morning mist and eyelashes still heavy with dreams. Behind them, the Citadel's stony towers lay far in the distance, a dark silhouette against the horizon, an echo of the life they had left behind. Here, where fishing boats bobbed in the harbor's gentle swell and seagulls cried overhead, Elysant felt an unfamiliar swell of hope. Astral Haven, with its pastel-painted houses and laughter drifting from garden cafes, seemed determined to shake off the weight of its own history. A once sleepy port town now drawing artisans and merchants who whispered of fresh starts and open arms. They had arrived with little more than a battered leather satchel containing gold coins saved from Elysant's tailoring, a few precious bolts of cloth, and a silver locket bearing her mother's portrait. An elderly innkeeper named Marlowe, with ruddy cheeks and kind eyes, had welcomed them into a modest room above his tavern, the only lodging they could afford until Elysant's loom began to pay its own way. The room smelled of damp timber and tobacco pipe, but it was both roof and refuge. Zepharos pressed a chubby hand against the window's grime to watch the fishing vessels glide by, and Elysant sat on the narrow bed, mapping out the coming days in her mind. She had spent her life stitching silks and embroidering brocades in service to a citadel that demanded perfection yet offered little gratitude. Here, she resolved, her craft would be her own. Within hours of their arrival, She had scouted an unassuming storefront on Sea Haven Lane, a once-vacant workshop whose signs still read, Astral Tailoring Company, in faded gold leaf. With trembling hands, she had negotiated with the owner, a surly man named Percy Whitlock whose shop had stood empty for months. Percy, intrigued by Elysant's confident pitch and clear craftsmanship samples, agreed to a modest rent and even offered to teach her the ropes of local commerce. At last, Elysant looked at the narrow windows once more. This would be Zepharos and Elysant's atelier. On the first morning of business, Elysant and Zepharos opened the creaky wooden door to the shop and were greeted by a palette of dusty cloth rolls, mottled terracotta walls, and a single sunlight beam dancing through a cracked pane. The echoes of citadel chainsaw blasts and angry commands were replaced by the gentle murmur of sea wind and the distant clang of a blacksmith forging anchors. Zepharos toddled to a wooden bench, immediately examining a bolt of flaxen linen with wide-eyed wonder. Elysant smiled, breathing in the scent of possibility. Her first customer arrived barely an hour later. A sprightly woman named Maribel Sloane, whose daughter was to be married in 2 weeks and who desperately needed a unique wedding sash. She lifted lengths of fabric with delicate care, ivory chiffon shot through with silver threads, pale blue chiffon like sky at dawn, and asked Elysant to design a sash that evoked moonlight on calm waves. Elysant sketched several patterns on ledger paper, each adorned with swirling crests and embroidered seashell motifs. Maribel's eyes sparkled at the final design, a sash of ivory chiffon with silver spirals, embroidered by hand. That would drift behind her daughter like a milky trail. She placed a down payment and promised to return in 10 days. Word spread through the harbor district like sea foam rolling onto the shore. Fishermen's wives, dockworkers' daughters, and even the captain's steward slipped into the atelier, drawn by Maribel's enthusiastic recommendation. One by one, they purchased stoles, gloves, and linen shirts tailored in styles both practical and elegant. As Elysant measured shoulders, pinned seams, and adjusted hems, Zepharos sat atop a pile of velvet cushions, offering small toys to every visitor in a gesture of gratitude. His laughter, light, unguarded, wove its way into the rafters, turning the workshop into a home rather than a place of mere commerce. Elysant's mornings were spent drafting patterns and cutting fabric, afternoons at the old singer machine that hummed to life with every press of the pedal. Evenings she hand-stitched scalloped edges by candlelight. She packed each finished piece carefully in brown paper and twine, then delivered them herself to nearby homes. Her leather satchel balanced on one shoulder and Zepharos tucked under the other arm. The townsfolk, curious and welcoming, marveled at her dedication. Mrs. Camille Reese, who ran the bookshop next door, offered Elysant a cup of chamomile tea and space to display a sample gown in her front window. The gesture brought foot traffic to both businesses and cemented Elysant's place in the neighborhood. Yet the path was never without hardship. One morning, Elysant discovered that a bolt of imported silk had been misordered, too pale, too plain to satisfy her high standards. With a sinking heart, she contacted Percy Whitlock, who agreed to cover half the cost of a second bolt for the atelier. That afternoon, she visited the docks to negotiate directly with a merchant from deep-water schooners who carried fabrics from far-off lands. It took patience, a bargain in favor of early payment, and a commitment that every inch would be used in her next collection. By dusk, a crate of richly colored silk, emerald green and sapphire blue, arrived at her door, and her spirits soared. As the weeks passed, petitions for commissions arrived in embroidered letter pouches, curtains for the mayor's sitting room, waistcoats for the harbor watchman, and even reparations on a torn banner for the Astral Haven militia. Each project tested her skills and expanded her reputation. Elysant taught Zepharos to thread thimbles with spools of brightly colored thread. Together they stitched a natural bond stronger than any citadel chain. They found joy in the rhythmic cycle of creation: measure, cut, stitch, press. In Astral Haven, her talent was met with gratitude and respect rather than obligation and disregard. One evening, As candles guttered against the twilight sky, Elysant closed the atelier door and leaned against the wooden frame, exhaustion softening into contentment. Zepharos practiced tracing falcon motifs on scraps of linen with a stub of charcoal, his small mouth pursed in sheer concentration. Elysant inhaled the scent of lavender soap from the laundry yard and sea salt mingled with oilskin from the fishing gear next door. Here, beneath the pastel glow of street lamps and the gentle lull of waves on the harbor stone, she had found a purpose beyond mere survival. In the days that followed, she kept growing the business, offering evening classes for local seamstresses, commissioning a simple sign, an indigo falcon in flight over silver waves, to hang above the atelier's door, and forging alliances with other artisans in Astral Haven. By the time the first month drew to a close, Zepharos and Elysant's Atelier had become a beacon for quality and innovation, a place where a single stitch could mend more than cloth, it could mend a broken spirit. Elysant tucked Zepharos into bed every night beneath a patchwork quilt she had created from fabric scraps, each square a memory of a commission fulfilled, a kindness received, a failure overcome. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "We did this, my brave tailor. We built our home from thread and hope." Outside their window, the last lantern glow faded into darkness, and a gentle breeze carried the promise of tomorrow. Astral Haven, with its bustling docks and warm-hearted people, had become more than a refuge. It was a canvas on which Elysant could paint her own destiny, a tapestry woven from adversity, talent, and unwavering love for her son. In the sanctuary of her atelier, under lantern light and sea-scented air, she realized that her legacy would not be defined by rigid citadel walls, but by every stitch that bore the imprint of her courage and the shining possibility that tomorrow would hold yet another sunrise of freedom. The morning sun filtered through the frosted glass of Zepharos and Elysant's Atelier, painting the room in soft, golden hues. Elysant Moonspire stood at her cutting table, laying out lengths of emerald and sapphire silk that had arrived only days before. Zepharos, perched on a high stool beside her, played quietly with a spool of thread, his small fingers rolling it back and forth as though coaxing music from the polished cylinder. The scent of fresh salt breeze drifted in through the open door, mixing with the soft tang of damp linen and lavender-scented soap from the neighboring laundry yard. Elysant paused to brush a loose strand of hair back into her braid, mind focused on the spring wedding sash she was drafting for a local merchant's daughter. It was her busiest season yet, and orders had piled up faster than she could stitch. Still, she welcomed every task. Each seam was a small victory against the fear and cruelty she had left behind. She smoothed her shears across the fabric, flattening out lines that would guide needle and thread. Just as she reached for her needle cushion, the bell above the door tinkled. She glanced up, expecting the shy housekeeper's daughter or a bearded fisherman eager for a simple repair. Instead, the workshop brightened with the arrival of a tall figure framed by morning light, a man whose presence seemed to command the very air. He stood at the threshold for a moment, surveying the room with calm, curious eyes. His dark hair was neatly pulled back, revealing a strong jaw and high cheekbones dusted with the bloom of health. A trimmed beard accentuated the firmness of his chin. He wore a long, slate-gray coat that suggested both practical purpose and subtle elegance, its cuffs and collar trimmed in muted silver embroidery reminiscent of waves cresting on dark waters. Elysant's breath caught. This must be Cashin Stormworm, the merchant's son who had anchored his family's fleet here in Astral Haven. Rumor spoke of his fairness in trade and kindness to sailors disabled by storm or fever. Yet to see him stood before her, poised and unassuming, was something entirely different. She set down her shears and wiped her hands on her apron. Zepharos clambered down from his stool and ran to Elysant's side, tugging gently at her skirt. "Mama," he whispered wide-eyed. Elysant offered him a reassuring smile. "Stay close, my brave tailor," she murmured, brushing his curls before turning back to the stranger. "Good morning. How may I help you?" Cashin stepped forward with deliberate grace. Good morning, Lady Elysant. His voice was warm, with a subtle depth that resonated against the high ceilings. I hope I'm not intruding. I have heard extraordinary things about your atelier. He paused, eyes meeting hers with genuine respect. I would be honored if you would consider designing a uniform for the crew of Stormworm and Tides. Elysant's heart fluttered. Designing for a merchant fleet was no small request. It was a testament to her growing reputation. Yet she fought to steady her voice. Mr. Stormworm, I am humbled. Please sit. She gestured toward a polished oak bench by the window. Tell me what you envision. Cashin accepted the seat, Zepharos toddling after him, placing the wooden eagle he favored in Cashin's hand. The man's face softened as he cradled the toy. Thank you, young sir, he said kindly. These uniforms must be sturdy enough for deck duty, yet comfortable for long voyages. I thought perhaps a blue-gray wool trimmed with silver braid, reflecting the sea spray and moonlight that guide us home. Elysant listened intently, sketching rough outlines on a scrap of parchment. She measured the width of the bench's backrest with discreet glances, envisioning the double-breasted cut he described. A double-breasted style will provide warmth and ease of movement, she said, pencil dancing across the page. The silver braid can echo the Stormworm sigil, two curling waves emerging from a single crest. I can incorporate hidden pockets beneath the lapels for charts and compasses. Cashin's eyes brightened. Exactly the balance I seek. Form and function intertwined. He leaned forward, brushing a streak of sunlight across the sketch. I have no doubt your craftsmanship will endure every gale. May I leave the rest to your expertise? Elysant nodded, her confidence swelling. I will craft a prototype and have it ready within 8 days. She rounded on Zepharos, who had slipped behind her chair and was peeking at the sketch. And you, my apprentice, will help me adjust the fit when the sailors arrive. She ruffled his hair, and he beamed. Cashin stood, gathering his coat. Thank you, Lady Elysant. I will return to review the sample. He offered her a slight bow, and Elysant curtsied, her skirts haloed in the morning light. He turned to Zepharos. Be kind to your mother, young master. She weaves more than cloth, she weaves hope. With that enigmatic blessing, he departed, leaving the bell tinkling in his wake. Elysant drew a deep breath and pivoted to her workbench, letting each careful cut and precise stitch reaffirm her resolve. Zepharos danced in circles, mimicking the swirl of Cashin's cloak, and the workshop filled once more with the melodies of renewal. Over the next days, the atelier buzzed with purpose. Elysant measured local fishermen and dockhands by day and fitted a selected group of sailors by night. Cashin appeared mid-morning on the 7th day, stepping into the workspace like a captain boarding his vessel. The prototype jackets hung on a wooden mannequin, their wool creased into shape, braids shimmering like moonlit seas. He studied the piece, running a thoughtful fingertip along the seam. Elysant held her breath. The sailors, stern-faced men accustomed to the brine and spray, slipped into the uniforms one by one. Each accepted the fit with a nod, hands swept across lapels and cuffs as if greeting an old friend. Zepharos stood beside his mother, clapping his wooden eagle against his palm in approval. Cashin turned to Elysant, a genuine smile lighting his features. These are perfect, he declared. Comfortable, resilient, and unmistakably ours. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather pouch, handing it to her. A binding advance, half payment on the order, and a token of my thanks. Elysant opened the pouch to find a handful of gleaming coins embossed with the Stormworm crest. The weight of them in her palm felt like affirmation. She met Cashin's eyes, gratitude radiating in her smile. Thank you, she whispered. I look forward to outfitting Stormworm and Tides for every horizon. As he left, Zepharos ran after him to present the wooden eagle, a symbol of loyalty and friendship. Cashin accepted it with a gentle laugh, ruffling the boy's curls. I shall carry your gift with pride, young master, he told him, and think of your mother's skill each time I wear this uniform. Elysant watched them depart, the man whose respect and kindness had broken through the citadel's shadows. and her little boy, whose innocent joy had forged a fragile but unbreakable bond. In that moment, she realized Astral Haven had given them more than a shop and a livelihood. It had given them connection, dignity, and a future woven from the threads of courage and compassion. Night fell, and the Atelier's lantern cast soft pools of light over the finished uniforms folded neatly on the table. Elysant tucked the leather pouch into her desk drawer, lining the coins against the edge. She settled Zepharos into his cot, brushing his hair back once more. "Cashin Stormworm is a good man," she murmured, "and I will need allies like him in the days to come." As she extinguished the lamp and drew the curtains against the star-dusted sky, Elysant allowed herself one moment of unguarded hope. Beyond the harbor's gentle lullaby, beyond the citadel's oppressive walls, her new life in Astral Haven glowed with promise, and in the heart of that newfound promise, she and Zepharos Dawnshard would thrive together. The first whispers of autumn painted the rooftops of Astral Haven in bronze and gold, and a crisp breeze heralded change in the harbor town. Elysant Moonspire found herself tying last stitches on the final set of uniforms for Stormworm and Tides when a soft rap came at her atelier door. She set down her needle and eased the door open to find an elegantly dressed older woman standing beneath the lantern glow. Her silver hair pulled into a graceful chignon, and her robes a rich teal that contrasted with the amber evening light. This was Lady Aurelia Stormworm, matron of the Stormworm fleet and mother to Cashin, whose reputation for kindness and integrity had quickly spread through the town. "Elysant," Lady Aurelia greeted, her voice warm yet tinged with authority. "I hope I'm not intruding." Elysant stepped aside and ushered her in, gesturing toward a small settee by the window. Zepharos, perched on a high stool and threading colored ribbon through a buttonhole, looked up and offered her a shy wave. Lady Aurelia's eyes softened at the sight. "Good evening, young master," she said, dipping a nod to Zepharos before turning back to Elysant. "May I sit?" Elysant settled beside her guest, smoothing her hands on her apron. "Of course, Lady Aurelia. How may I help you this evening?" The older woman folded her hands elegantly in her lap. "I came not to commission garments, but to speak of hearts rather than stitches." Elysant inclined her head in polite curiosity. "I've noticed how devoted Cashin has become, not only to my boy but to you as well. His admiration for your talent and your son's radiant spirit has blossomed into genuine affection." A gentle flush warmed Elysant's cheeks. She crossed her hands in her lap. "Cashin has been very kind to us. His support has meant more than I can express." Lady Aurelia's eyes twinkled. "Kindness is a rare gift, and kindness, when paired with worthiness, becomes a foundation for something more. I have watched you transform this atelier into a haven of hope and craftsmanship, and I have watched Cashin return again and again, not just for uniforms, but to assist you, to share in the pride of each completed piece." She paused, measuring her words. "I wonder, Elysant, if you might consider his heart as you consider your future." Elysant's pulse fluttered. Matchmaking was an unwelcome memory from Stormquill Citadel, where matrimony had bound her in chains of obligation. Here in Astral Haven, was she truly free to receive such a proposition? She touched Zepharos' shoulder, drawing comfort from his wide-eyed innocence. "Lady Aurelia, I am honored by your kindness and Cashin's support. I'm still finding my footing, rebuilding my life, caring for Zepharos, and growing my business. I've never before considered myself worthy of matters of the heart." Lady Aurelia reached across and laid a gentle hand on Elysant's. "You are more than worthy. Break free from old shadows. In Stormworm and Tides, Cashin has found a partner whose skill and integrity stand equal to his own. And in you, Elysant, he has found a kindred spirit, a woman of strength, creativity, and compassion." She let the words linger in the warm lamplight as Zepharos traced imaginary falcons on the tabletop. Elysant swallowed. Fear and doubt warred inside her. But beneath the tremor, she felt a flicker of hope. Here was no rigid citadel demanding dowry and obedience, but a mother offering her son's hand in kindness. She lifted her eyes to Lady Aurelia's, searching for mischief or second motives. Finding none, she drew a steadying breath. "I thank you, Lady Aurelia. I will ponder your words carefully." The older woman smiled, a gentle curve that creased her porcelain cheek. "I will not rush you. Take as long as you need. But know this, in Cashin's heart you have already planted a seed. If you choose to nurture it, it will grow into something beautiful." She rose gracefully. "Good night, Elysant. I look forward to seeing both of you at dinner tomorrow, should you accept my invitation." Elysant accompanied Lady Aurelia to the door, where the lantern's glow framed the matron's dignified silhouette. "Thank you for your visit," Elysant said softly. Lady Aurelia inclined her head. "Remember, dear child, life's richest tapestry is woven from threads of courage and trust. Good night." With that, she stepped into the cooling air of the evening, her footsteps echoing softly along the cobblestones. Elysant closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding in a new rhythm of possibility. Zepharos's tiny voice cut through her reverie. "Mama, is Cashin a good friend?" Elysant scooped her son into her arms, embracing him tightly. "He is, darling. He cares for us both, more than I ever expected." She kissed his forehead, closing her eyes to feel the solidity of her resolve. For the first time since fleeing Stormquill Citadel, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by fear and escape, but by partnership and promise. The night wind rattled the shutters, but within the Atelier, a different wind stirred in her soul, the gentle breeze of a new chapter, one in which love and loyalty might weave themselves into the tapestry of her life, stitch by hopeful stitch. The morning sun broke over Astral Haven in a riot of rose and gold, glinting on the rippled surface of the harbor as fishing boats bobbed against weathered piers. Elysant Moonspire rose early, heart fluttering with anticipation, and slipped from bed to find Zepharos Dawn's Heart already perched on a stool by the window, squeezing a wooden eagle toy with delight. Today was no ordinary day at the Atelier. Between the hum of the sewing machine and the tang of salt on the breeze, Elysant sensed that something was ready to change. She dressed quickly in a wave-patterned silk gown she had designed herself, emerald folds trimmed in silver braid, before gathering Zepharos in her arms. His bright eyes searched hers. "What's special today, Mama?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. She smoothed his curly hair. "You'll see, my brave heart," she whispered. "Very, very soon." Hand in hand, they made their way to Zepharos and Elysant's atelier, where the front windows framed a dazzling tableau, the newly arrived wedding sashes for the mayor's daughter, draped over mannequins that caught every flicker of dawn light. Elysant paused at the door, breathing in the scent of freshly laundered linen and sea salt, flecked with lavender from the neighboring apothecary. She felt the familiar beat of nerves, equal parts excitement and vulnerability, but steadied herself with a gentle squeeze of Zepharos's hand. The workshop door chimed softly as they entered. Inside, the space was laid out in meticulous order. Spools of thread in every hue lined the shelves. Piles of fabric bolts stood like colorful sentinels. Sketches of new designs adorned a corkboard above the work table. Zepharos released his eagle toy to clamber onto the table's edge, where he immediately began inspecting a half-finished chiffon sash. Elysant smiled, then turned toward the back room. There, leaning against a bolt of turquoise silk, stood Cashin's Stormworm. He straightened at the sound of their arrival, a slow smile spreading across his face. His slate-gray coat was unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with fabric chalk. His dark hair, usually pulled back for work, fell loosely about his brow, and his storm-gray eyes lit up with unmistakable warmth. "Mama, look," Zepharos chirped. He waved his eagle at Cashin, who scooped the boy into his arms. "Good morning, first mate," Cashin greeted, voice rich and steady. He pressed Zepharos close, planting a gentle kiss on his temple. Elysant's pulse quickened. The intimacy of the gesture, the ease between them, spoke volumes louder than any orchestrated ceremony ever could. Cashin set Zepharos down beside him and held out a small wooden box. "For you," he said softly, extending the gift across the table. Zepharos watched, eyes wide, as Elysant opened the box to reveal a delicate moonstone pendant set in filigreed silver. The stone glowed with inner light, shifting from pale blue to pearly white as it caught the morning sun. Elysant's breath caught. "Cashin," she began, voice trembling with emotion. The memory of Stormquill Citadel's cold halls and Vespera Coldthorn's icy gaze seemed a distant nightmare as she gazed at the ring's companion, a token not of duty, but of affection. Cashin stepped forward and took her hands in his. "Elysant Moonspire, you have woven hope and beauty into my days. You have given me friendship, partnership, and a glimpse of something I never dared to imagine. I cannot pretend to know what the future holds, but I know this. My heart belongs to you." He paused, searching her eyes. "Will you accept this promise, this symbol of my devotion, and share your life with me?" Tears brimmed in Elysant's eyes. Zepharos reached up, touching her cheek. Elysant guided his hand to her lips. "Yes," she whispered, voice choked but radiant. "Yes, I will." Cashin smiled, relief and joy flooding his features. He lifted the moonstone pendant and gently fastened it around Elysant's neck. The cool silver rested against her skin like a second heartbeat. He then withdrew a second box, a slender silver band etched with wave motifs. "And this," he said, "to bind us in matrimony." Elysant drew a steadying breath and let him slip the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit, as though made for her alone. Their embrace was tender and fierce all at once, lasting long enough to seal a new covenant between past sorrows and future hopes. Zepharos clapped and squealed with delight, demanding to try the pendant himself. Cashin lifted him high, and Zepharos giggled, his laughter echoing against the rafters like chimes in a warm breeze. For the next hours, the Atelier shifted from workshop to celebration. Word spread like starlight, and neighbors, seamstresses, bakers, fishermen's wives, arrived bearing pastries and sweet cakes, toasts of sweet tea and mead, all offered with heartfelt congratulations. Elysant moved among them as if floating, still wearing the moonstone pendant and wedding band as new chapters of her life settled into place. Each smile she received lit her resolve, affirming that here, in Astral Haven, she had found not only refuge but a community that embraced her courage and her talent. Late that afternoon, Cashin and Elysant stole away to the harbor's edge, where the tide lapped at weathered pilings and gulls circled overhead. Zepharos toddled ahead, chasing sunbeams on the water. Cashin draped his coat around Elysant's shoulders against the sea breeze and pressed a finger to the ring on her hand. "This is only the beginning," he murmured. She leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes shining with tears of joy. "We will face whatever storms come," she replied. "Together." He kissed the top of her head. "Together." Under the vast sky of Astral Haven, where love blossomed not from duty, but from mutual respect and shared dreams, Elysant Moonspire understood that her life had truly begun. The Atelier behind them, where needles and thread had woven hope, now stood as testament to her strength and her newfound freedom. In the heart of this harbor town, love had flowered at last, blooming bright and unwavering against any tide. The wedding morning dawned clear and bright over Astral Haven, the horizon a sweep of rose and gold that promised new beginnings. Seagulls wheeled overhead, and the tang of sea salt lingered in the air as Elysant Moonspire stood before the full-length mirror in her bridal suite above the Atelier. Her gown, crafted from ivory silk interwoven with silver threads, nestled against her skin like a second promise of hope. The bodice bore an embroidered falcon rising against stylized waves, each stitch a testament to the journey she and Zepharos had undertaken. Tiny lavender sprigs, gathered at dawn from the coastal dunes, were woven into her braid, their gentle scent mingling with the salty breeze drifting in through the open window. Below, Zepharos Dawn's Hard darted through the doorway in his miniature naval uniform, slate gray trousers and a crisp, white shirt edged with silver braid. His curls framed a face alight with unbridled excitement. "Mama, I'm the best man," he proclaimed, puffing out his chest as if to prove it. Elysant swept him into her arms, laughter lifting from her chest like a bright song. "Yes, my brave first mate," she said, kissing his forehead. "Today we begin our greatest voyage yet." They descended the narrow stairs to the cobblestone street, where townsfolk had gathered along the harbor promenade, lanterns swaying gently and fluttering bunting casting kaleidoscopic patterns on pastel-painted buildings. Percussion from drums and the lilting melody of lutes drifted from a makeshift bandstand, where musicians tuned their instruments in anticipation. Steam rose from wooden carts laden with fresh bread, seafood pies, and trays of honey-glazed pastries. The scent of jasmine and wood smoke mingled in the air, creating a tapestry of comfort and celebration. The ceremony took place at a small seaside chapel, its arched doorway framing the harbor beyond. Shell-encrusted windows scattered prisms of light across pews filled with faces who had cheered Elysant's triumph over adversity, Marlowe the innkeeper with his boisterous grin, Mistress Hawke wiping gentle tears, Percy Whitlock nodding in rare sentiment, Marian the baker offering a crumb of her signature saffron loaf whenever she could spare one. Even Lady Aurelia Stormworm, resplendent in teal and silver brocade, dabbed at her eyes with lace handkerchief, her proud gaze fixed on Elysant. As Elysant walked down the aisle on Percy's arm, the sun caught the silver in her gown, creating a halo of light that danced across the stone floors like living stardust. At the altar stood Cassian Stormworm, tall and composed, his storm-gray eyes alight with emotion as they tracked Elysant's every step. Zepharos bounded forward to stand beside him, clutching a small bouquet of lavender and sea lavender tied with indigo ribbon, an echo of the Atelier's signature hues. The officiant, Father Brandis, spoke of love as the truest form of courage, of marriage as a voyage guided by trust and compassion. When Cassian gently lifted Elysant's hand to place a silver wedding band etched with wave motifs upon her finger, a collective breath seemed to rise from the assembled guests. Zepharos, emboldened by the moment, handed Elysant a single lavender bloom, which she tucked into her braid with a luminous smile. The chapel erupted in warm applause, the sound mingling with the lapping tide outside. The celebration that followed was nothing short of a town-wide feast. Long tables were set along the harbor's edge, decorated with garlands of seashells, driftwood, and wildflowers. Bouquets of peonies and hydrangeas, gifts from friends. Filled vases carved from reclaimed driftwood. Waitstaff in white linen and silver-trimmed aprons navigated between tables bearing trays of steaming crab cakes, salt-cured fish platters, bowls of spiced sweet potatoes, and baskets of bread baked just that morning. Lattice-topped pies, blueberry, peach, and the local specialty of sea buckthorn sat temptingly beside pitchers of spiced cider and chilled mint lemonade. The mayor of Astral Haven raised her glass for a toast to Elysant and Cassian, whose love has stitched the very fabric of our community into a brighter tapestry. May your days be filled with fair winds and full hearts. The assembled guests echoed, "Hear, hear," and glasses clinked, the warm glow of shared happiness reflecting like firelight on every face. Elysant found herself enveloped in embraces and congratulations, each gesture anchoring her more firmly to the life she had crafted. Maribel Sloane pressed a slice of lemon cake into her hand. "For strength on the days when storms roll in," she said. Mistress Hawke offered a plate of savory tarts. "For busy hands that never rest," she winked. Percy Whitlock placed a small chest of gold coins, his share of wedding gifts, into Cassian's palm. "You both earned this," he said gruffly, eyes misty. Lady Aurelia stole a moment alone with Elysant, slipping a silver hairpin into her hair. "A token of our family's blessing," she whispered. Each gift bore the imprimatur of care, weaving a net of support that would carry Elysant and her new family forward. As dusk settled into a tapestry of ink and starlight, the festivities moved to the workshop below the Atelier. Lanterns swung from rafters, illuminating bolts of fabric and sewing machines that seemed to pulse with the day's lingering joy. Apprentices, trained by Elysant in both stitch and spirit, presented a surprise for the newlyweds, a patchwork quilt, each square embroidered with a scene from Elysant's journey, Moonspire Village's lilac orchards, the gray walls of Stormquill Citadel, the sewing machine's first hum, the wedding sashes, and now, a heart encircled by waves. Touched beyond words, Elysant hugged each apprentice, tears slipping free as she read the quilt story stitch by stitch. That evening, as the last guests departed beneath a sky bursting with lantern-lit lanterns floating on the tide, Cashin led Elysant and Zepharos to the newly decorated living quarters above the Atelier. The ground floor still hummed with the promise of commerce. Newly erected racks showcased winter coats trimmed in wool, and a freshly painted sign, an indigo falcon arcing above silver waves, swayed gently outside the door. Upstairs, the rooms glowed with the warmth of home, cream-painted walls, a handmade rug woven from fabric remnants, and shelves lined with pottery mugs cradling lavender from the dunes. A small crib bearing Zepharos's sleeping form rested beside a four-poster bed draped in curtains Elysant had sewn. Cashin paused at the threshold, looking at the room they had built together. "We have everything we need," he said softly, his voice husky with emotion. He drew Elysant into an embrace, the solid warmth of his arms a refuge she had never known in her citadel-bound past. "And every reason to be grateful," she whispered, burying her face against his chest. The following weeks were a flurry of growth and prosperity. Orders poured in for winter cloak commissions. Apprentices from neighboring towns arrived seeking lessons in her unique stitching techniques. And Zepharos and Elysant's Atelier expanded its offerings to include embroidered home linens and evening wear. Cashin's deft negotiations with northern silk merchants brought rare turquoise and pearl gray fabrics to Astral Haven's docks. Elysant's inventive designs sold out before they were even finished. Mistress Hawk's kitchen provided refreshments for the bustling workshop, and Marlowe's Inn offered lodging to trainees who hailed from as far as the Outer Isles. Zepharos, now 4 and brimming with energy, practiced threading needles with painstaking care under the patient guidance of Mistress Hawk, earning the affectionate title of Junior Tailor. Each apprentice, each satisfied customer, and each piece of completed work stood as proof that this enterprise was more than commerce. It was the embodiment of resilience and love. In quieter moments, Elysant and Cashin would steal away to the harbor's edge, where they first professed their devotion. They strolled hand in hand over weathered piers, lanterns reflecting on the glassy water, and spoke of future plans, a seaside home beyond the Atelier, travels on Cashin's fleet to distant ports, and perhaps another child to join Zepharos in the tapestry of their shared life. They imagined new designs inspired by exotic spices and distant sunsets, and mapped out partnerships with fellow artisans to transform Astral Haven into a hub of creativity and community. Occasionally, Elysant's dreams carried her back to the stony corridors of Stormquill Citadel and the sting of Draven Stormquill's betrayal. Her cheek would ache with phantom pain, and her heart would hunch with residual fear. But each time she awoke, the warmth of Cashin's arm around her and Zepharos's voice calling "Mama" would chase away the shadows. She pressed her hand to the moonstone pendant at her throat and felt the steady beat of courage echo in her chest. No longer was she bound by dowry and duty. She was bound by choice and devotion, by the shared vow etched in silver and stone, to face every dawn, every gale, together. As winter's first snow dusted the rooftops of Astral Haven in a glittering cloak, Elysant Moonspire stood at her atelier window, watching Zepharos's small figure atop a snow-laden bench, hurling snowballs in practice for winter markets. Cashin joined her, wrapping a woolen shawl around her shoulders. She leaned into him, warmth blossoming in her core. "We truly are happy," she said, voice soft as falling snow. Cashin pressed a kiss to her temple. "More than I ever dared to dream," he replied. Beneath the soft glow of lanterns and drifting snowflakes, the Atelier lights burned bright, a beacon of love and hope that no storm could ever dim. And in the heart of that glow, Elysant Moonspire finally learned the meaning of true happiness. a life sewn together from threads of courage, compassion, and unwavering devotion. The years that followed cemented Astral Haven as more than a refuge. It became home in the fullest sense. Elysant Moonspire and Cashin Stormworm's partnership flourished like a ship riding a fair wind, steady and sure. Their atelier, once a modest sewing room, grew into a thriving atelier and textile workshop, its windows casting warm light onto cobblestone streets where hopeful apprentices paused to admire embroidered banners and watch the shimmer of silver-threaded gowns. Under their joint stewardship, Zepharos and Elysant's Atelier expanded to include a dye house where vibrant pigments, plum, ocean teal, sunset amber, were blended in copper vats, their fragrances drifting across the harbor at dawn. Cashin's fleet continued to bear their wares to distant ports and return with exotic silks and spices that Elysant wove into fresh designs. Zepharos, now 8 years old, took his place as the Atelier's honorary junior tailor. Each morning, he donned a miniature version of his father's captain's coat, storm gray with silver trim, and marched proudly among stacks of fabric, his small hands practicing careful stitches under Elysant's gentle guidance. On Saturdays, he hosted a junior sewing circle for local children, teaching them patterns of simple stitches and encouraging them to transform leftover scraps into cloth dolls and stuffed animals, a project that delighted fishermen's families and brightened the children's winter evenings. Elysant watched her son with a swell of pride. His laughter and curiosity not only warmed her heart, but reminded her every day of why she had risked everything to build this new life. Cashin became known across the Isles not just for his fair trade in herring and cod, but for his advocacy of ethics and community. He invested in seaworthy lifeboats for smaller fishing vessels, financed medical aid for seasick crews, and commissioned a floating clinic that traveled between remote coastal villages. Elysant designed uniforms for the clinic staff, practical tunics in pale seafoam green with embroidered insignia of a dove and wave, so that compassion and dignity accompanied every patient's care. Each voyage of Stormworm and Tides carried not only cargo but the promise of shared prosperity and mutual respect, a testament to the couple's combined vision. In the quiet hours of early evening, Elysant and Cashin often walked the shoreline, sand cool beneath their boots and star-sung galaxies dancing overhead. They spoke of future ambitions. A seaside cottage with flowering vines climbing trellises, wild gardens bursting with herbs and lace flowers that Elysant could harvest for her sewing dyes. A small community school where Zepharos and other children could learn reading, mathematics, and the joy of creating poetry by candlelight, and a cooperative guild of artisans, carpenters, potters, weavers, dedicated to preserving traditional crafts while embracing innovation. Their words wove a tapestry of hope that stretched beyond themselves to every soul in Astral Haven. Their personal lives intertwined seamlessly with these grander dreams. Each year, Elysant and Cashin celebrated their anniversary with a twilight ceremony on the pier. A modest banquet of fresh oysters, glazed crab, and elderflower cordial, followed by lanterns set adrift on the tide, symbolic vessels carrying wishes and blessings into the future. Zepharos, grown tall and responsible, helped his mother light each lantern and guided them beyond the harbor walls, where darkness bowed to gentle luminescence. In those moments, the entire town paused to watch, finding collective solace and unity in a shared ritual of light. As muslin and brocade gave way to winter woolens and embroidered velvet cloaks, the atelier adapted, producing warm capes and lined trousers for dockworkers and warming shawls for elders gathering around hearths. Elysant introduced a charitable program. For every piece sold, one garment was donated to those in need, ensuring that no family faced the harbor's chill without new threads. Cashin organized distribution through the floating clinic, docking at fishing villages and distributing cloaks to fishermen's families who labored on decks long before sunrise. The harmony of commerce and charity became the atelier's signature, and travelers marveled at how a single seamstress and a single captain had reshaped a town's character. Despite the prosperity, neither Elysant nor Cashin forgot the shadows of their pasts. Each year, on the anniversary of her departure from Stormquill Citadel, Elysant donned a simple black sash and laid a wreath of lilac and wild thyme on the tide-marked sand, whispering a silent benediction for ancestors and for all who suffered under harsh traditions. Cashin, never one for idle sentiment, stood by her in respectful silence, his presence a covenant of protection and remembrance. These private observances grounded Elysant's spirit, reminding her that the peaceful future she cherished was bought with both courage and compassion. As time flowed on, apprentices trained under Elysant truly became masters in their own right, opening shops of their own along Seabreeze Row and branching into leatherwork, millinery, and jewelry. Cashin, no longer merely a merchant of fish and fabrics, published a treatise on ethical trade and maritime safety that became required reading for captains across the Isles. Together, they hosted seasonal fairs that drew visitors from beyond the port, showcasing native artisans, preserving folk music traditions, and revitalizing coastal economies once ravaged by storm and neglect. In the comfort of their home above the Atelier, Elysant and Cashin built a quiet legacy of laughter and lore. Their evening ritual remained unchanged, Cashin reading tall tales of sea serpents and distant shores to Zepharos by the fire, while Elysant embroidered new patterns into his quilt. Symbols of courage and kindness she believed every child deserved. As Zepharos drifted to sleep, Cashin and Elysant would lift him to the small bed draped in silken curtains he had chosen himself. Then stand together in the lamplight, their hands intertwined, watching the ship lanterns bob at the harbor's edge. "Look how far we've come," Cashin would say, voice hushed with wonder. Elysant would lean in, resting her head against his shoulder. "And how far we will go," she replied, a soft smile curving her lips. Beneath the lantern glow and the lullaby of waves, their eyes would meet, echoing a promise that the love they found so unexpectedly would steer them through every storm and every calm. Thus, in Astral Haven's gentle rhythms, waves lapping, sails unfurling, lanterns flickering, their peaceful future unfolded like a tapestry stitched with threads of resilience, creativity, and unwavering devotion. The Citadel's shadows lay far behind, and ahead, endless horizons awaited, each dawn a fresh page on which to write the next chapter of a life truly woven together. And that brings us to the end of today's story on Truistery Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.